Let's talk about Dolly Alderton. There is quite a cult following behind this woman, and I don't know much about her. I have one of her best-selling books, the memoir Everything I Know About Love, sitting on my shelf, but this one I actually read as an audiobook, almost like out of curiosity, because I feel like I've heard about her so much, and she is a London-based writer. So I was like, okay, I'll give her a chance. And then if I really enjoyed the audiobook, I might pick up the memoir too. This wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I see why people enjoy reading her work. So this is my very short, precise, I hope short, take on Dolly Alderton. So the book I read is called Ghosts, and this I believe is her debut novel. Debut novel. Dolly Alderton was born in London, I believe. She is a 34-year-old Londoner, and she used to be a columnist for the Sunday Times. She writes for the Sunday Times, and for me that is quite an issue because the protagonist of the story she is also a 30s, like early 30s something Londoner who is also an author, but she's primarily like a food author who writes for like the Taste. I think she has a book. Anyways, it felt very autofiction, like it's half autobiographical, half fiction, which I've seen quite a few authors do, and I've personally, like in this case, I found it very distracting. I can think of like Rachel Cusk, Ruth Ozeki, both of them write in a way that is very autofictional, and I do realize now, having read a couple of people who tend to write about characters very close to their age and very close to their profession and basically the same character as themselves but slightly different with a different name, I find that very distracting because you tend to realize that this is so much of the author themselves. You don't entirely believe the world building that goes on in this world. So for that reason, I would have preferred if the the protagonist, was a little bit more original. Having said that, Nina Dean, who's the protagonist of this story, she's a food writer in her 30s. Everything that is said through Nina, it feels very, very genuine and authentic, and I guess the character being so close to Dolly Alderton herself does play a part in this new character being so believable, but at the same time, if you don't know anything about the author, then I guess this would be a better reading experience. Since I had looked a tiny bit into Dolly Alderton, I just kept being like, wait, is this an autobiography? Is this also a memoir thing? Or is it like her writing about her experiences? No, actually it's fiction. So it's confusing. So Nina, she breaks off from this really long-term relationship, and currently she's single in her early 30s, and she has maybe one other single friend. Most of her friends are either in long-time relationships, or they are married, or they're having kids. So very much, if you think about like the typical age in London to start settling down, having kids and stuff, is your early 30s, and everything that she portrays in like all the stories and all the characters that she has put into the story are incredibly believable and incredibly real. Because if you live in London, like having lived in London myself, I could think of at least one person whose personality corresponds to one of these characters she's written. So it's all really, really, like, there's a lot of humor, a lot, very comical. I love those aspects of the story that she showed, like especially someone who is dating or starting to date after a long relationship. I've been in that place where I came out of a long relationship where we had like very similar friends, very close circle of friends that were both of our friends. So those kind of things, the small nuances that come up from, you know, being in your early 30s, of like, maybe you've dated someone, maybe you guys are super close, maybe you still have the same friends, maybe you still need to maintain a relationship, about aging parents, about work stability, and all of those things just coming. And also relationships that you thought were so strong that you suddenly start to second guess because you yourself have evolved so much. So do those relationships still serve you the way they once used to? So a lot of these questions are definitely incredibly valid. One thing I didn't maybe enjoy so much is Nina's character was just incredibly judgmental of everyone around her, whereas she felt like everyone was being judgmental towards her. There's a bit of that narcissism, which I feel like actually makes the character even more believable but just unlikable. I don't necessarily think that the character is meant to be the most likable character, but it's just sometimes it feels like she's contradicting herself, because she feels like everyone's very incredibly judgmental of her following a certain path in her life, whereas every time you hear her narrative of anybody else's life, it also comes across incredibly judgmental. So I feel like, so you kind of saying that other people shouldn't behave like that with you, while you continue to berate them for every kind of small decision that they make. But at the same time, I feel like the reality behind this character is the fact that she finds a bit of comfort, and I feel like it's a kind of like a self-preservation act, that she starts judging other people and she starts kind of comparing and saying like, oh, at least I'm not doing this. And I feel it's not Dolly Alderton making loads of contradictions in her own writing, but her actually trying to prove that this character is very nuanced, and she is in a way judgmental of other people because it's a defense mechanism. She tries to see what's happening in other people's lives and then create this narrative where, you know, she comes across as the sane person with who's made better choices in life. The cast of characters were pretty basic, but like I said, it was quite interesting, only because the relationship dynamics were very believable. Like the type of relationship Dolly had with her married friends versus single friends versus ex boyfriend, they were all incredibly believable stories. Another character that was like very kind of at the center of this story was Lola, who's another single friend of Nina's. And Lola's character, I think, is like probably the most spot on one, because she's someone who's like always wanting to be in relationships, always dating, and always kind of failing at it. But at the end, when she finds someone, she like completely disappears and becomes just like everyone else who's in a relationship, which I think is also very true of how people tend to behave, where they keep saying like, you know what, I really want to be in a relationship, but when I am, I'm not going to be like everyone else. And I think this obsession with like still doing everything while you're in a relationship and still being able to basically separate yourself from how everyone else is behaving, I feel like this obsession comes also from not a healthy place. So all the kind of toxic traits, I guess, or red flags that people had in this is also making the story all the more realistic. So even though I'm reading about probably people that I wouldn't want to interact with in real life, I think that in general this gives a very realistic view of current, I guess, friendships and dating in London and like kind of the city life. And that kind of proved to me what the whole appeal is behind Dolly Alderton. It's just that she's not trying to manufacture stories that, you know, go deeper than what needs to be said. I think she's very much trying to provide snapshots of the human condition as it is today, living in London and dating and being in your early 30s and what that experience is. I think she does such a good job at that, and I'm guessing that her other memoirs are similar, because I do want to, I mean, it did intrigue me enough to go and pick them up. And I sometimes actually appreciate when people don't try to, you know, they kind of stick to their subject matter and work around it. And I feel like did that really well. At no point in the book did it feel like she was just going off on a trajectory, trying to tap into topics that maybe, you know, it had nothing to do with this. Like, I really would have hated if this book suddenly started talking about the current political scenario, because it's like she's so hyper focused on this is what she's doing really well. But more than friendships or these platonic relationships between friends, I think what she's really good at portraying is the toxic or the tragic reality of dating in London, especially online dating, because she meets someone online called Max and kind of starts, you know, kicking it off, and they have these, like, the way that the pacing of the story, the pacing of the relationship, and how in the end, like, he ghosts her, and how much of an issue that is currently. I mean, I have firsthand experienced this, and I have so many firsthand collections. I mean, I've heard from so many friends that they had this experience as well of ghosting, which is such an issue, and hence the name ghost. I think that itself, she's just like a spot. I don't know how many times she's experienced this, but it's just so true the way it's done. And even the flex, like, I've personally never dated a British lad, so I haven't experienced this, but it's just exactly the way I've been, I guess, told the story before. So somewhat like people say when you read Dolly Alderton, it feels like you're sitting in the living room listening to your friends talk about their life, and that is really true. And I can't think of any other author who does that. So in some way, these are not like anything groundbreaking, but on the other hand, they also give you probably the most raw, the most like accessible emotions. Another thing that's really funny was the whole idea of like people kind of moving to the suburbs and kind of that being the end of the life. There's a lot of like cliche things also. Like there's definitely a lot of demonizing about parenting, demonizing about wanting to live a slower life outside of London. And in general, it's very much from the point of view of the protagonist who wants to kind of continue living in London, find love here, have a whirlwind romance, and, you know, be swept off her feet. And I feel like either the author is trying to just say like, this is, no matter what you say to these kind of people, they're always going to want this and they're always going to go for it until the time they themselves want something different. You can't really change their mind. Or is she as delusional to think that that is the kind of like, it feels a bit like you don't really know if she is trying to say this through the author's lens or her own kind of opinion, which is what I meant by like, you keep getting frustrated at the fact that it feels very much of a autobiographical piece than a fictional piece. But other than that, I think it was pretty good. I wouldn't say this is like, oh, one that you have to read, but if you're intrigued to know, and if, especially if you live in London, I think it would be an interesting read. And especially in your 30s, if you're struggling with friendships, struggling to kind of like, I guess, keep up with friendships from the past, or feeling kind of confused about current relationships in your life, I do think it gives you a bit of perspective, especially with female friendships. But yeah, I hope that was interesting. If you do pick up, let me know. I don't film a lot of, I guess, British authors anymore. I mostly do Southeast Asian books or East Asian books, but if there's anything you think would be interesting, leave them down below, and I'll see you next time.